Hi, and welcome back to this week's episode on Amplify. My name is Sanchi Singh, and this week I'm looking at India's waste pickers. India generates 62 million tons of waste annually, and in the chain of solid waste management, waste begins its journey from bins of high-income homes, is often sent to transfer stations, and ends up in landfill sites. However, in this entire journey, neither the households nor the municipal corporations actively segregate the waste. In some cases, the aim is for the solid waste to end up in a waste-to-energy plant, but in most cases, waste piles up high in landfills, eventually discharging poisonous gases into the air and soil. Despite widespread societal apathy and public funds that are spent on transportation of waste as opposed to its proper disposal, India has one of the best recycling rates in the world, where nearly 70% of all PET bottles are recycled in comparison to 31% in the USA. You might be wondering why. Well, this is largely owing to the informal chain of recycling, a chain comprising of 1.5 to 4 million waste pickers who pick up, clean, sort, and segregate recyclable waste to sell it further up the value chain to scrap dealers. An informal sector that contributes to 100% of all recycling done in our country. In this episode, we talk about our waste pickers, the precarious work that they do that goes unrecognized due to the space they occupy in society, hailing often from marginalized communities, and the work we need to do to close the loop on what we throw out. Hello and welcome to this week's episode on Amplify. Today I'm speaking to Rahul Nainani, who is the founder of Raddi Connect. Raddi Connect is a resource recovery social enterprise that works with multiple stakeholders like governments, brands, informal sector, consumers, etc. to divert waste away from landfills and oceans and into the economy to get reused, recycled, and repurposed. And I'm so excited to have you on here to talk all things trash, essentially. Thank you so much for finding time for this, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Sanchi, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
No problem. It's my pleasure too. I think sort of just to give a little bit of context to what Raddi is and what Raddiwalas do, can you just sort of talk about the role they play in managing waste in households in India?
Sure. So the term Raddi is essentially like a slang word for recyclable scrap that is used mainly in, I think, western parts of India. And Raddiwalas are essentially a part of this entire shadow network of the supply chain of waste that is essentially going around. So the Raddiwalas are essentially small-scale micro-entrepreneurs who have shops in popular residential areas, and they essentially trade on recyclable scrap. So they essentially get more scrap from households, offices, institutions where they go out and purchase this waste, bring it to their store, probably sort it out a little bit further, and essentially forward that to relevant recyclers or relevant wholesalers for further processing. The Raddiwalas actually are not just one people in the entire supply chain, but there's an entire shadow supply chain that's been working in the background, which we essentially have no idea about. It starts with your Raddiwala, then it goes on with your semi-wholesalers who are collecting it from there, and then going even down deeper into the recycling sector, which is largely informal, that is running in our country. So they are essentially micro-entrepreneurs collecting recyclable waste and ensuring that it's being channelized for recycling. That probably gives an idea.
Yeah. And in sort of the description about Raddi Connect, you talk a bit about how important it is to tap into this informal sector. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how this inspiration for Raddi Connect came to you.
Yeah, I think when we started the company back in 2015, we had a simple idea. We had an idea to solve a problem. And back then, we didn't know as much about the waste sector as much as we have known in the past 5 years. So it's been more of a journey for us, and the motivation has been coming more and more that we've been working in this space. Initially, when we did start up, we realized that there's this large informal sector that has been working in managing waste.
and they were very underutilized, and there was a lot of issues that were being faced from the customers' end and as well as from the Raddiwalas' end. So after digging a little bit deeper, we found out some ironical facts. We realized that having grown up in Bombay, I've seen that there's no shortage of waste in our country. There's dime a dozen. I mean, every neighborhood or every street that you go down, you'll see a lot of scrap around your household or neighborhood itself. But what was ironical was that India was actually importing lots and lots of trash from Europe, US, and the Middle East to just run our recycling factories. And that just sounded odd to us. We said that even though we have so much waste that we're generating ourselves, but we still are importing garbage from rest of the world to keep our industries running. So once we digged a little deeper, we found out that the challenge was with the recovery of this scrap, and that started with the consumers not being able to dispose their scrap properly, and also the supply chain after that, which was just fragmented, and it did not really cater to all kinds of scrap that it would deal with. So initially it was just to solve a problem where we saw that recovery was a challenge, and we thought that the informal sector could actually play a very important role, which they have been actually. Without them, our situation would have been much, much worse as compared to where we are at right now. So we thought that instead of displacing the existing informal structure, why not empower them and bring them a part of the solution. But I think actually the tipping point for me in terms of the inspiration or the motivation that has come up was after the fire that happened in the Devna dumping ground. So in early 2016, if you probably remember, there was this image circulated by NASA where they captured the fire at the Devna dumping ground from space. And that really became a talk of the town for the entire city of Bombay. So after a couple of weeks that the fire doused out, we ventured into the neighborhood of the Devna dumping ground to just figure out what exactly went down. And we tried to talk to a lot of local people around that neighborhood. And when we did go down over there were a few very surprising facts that came up. One was that these fires actually doesn't happen. It's not a one-off case where these fires actually happen, but it's actually an everyday situation. This particular day, the reason that the city woke up was because the Devna dumping ground is situated in such a way where they have the creek on one side and the city on the other side. And this particular day, when the fire went out of hand, the wind was blowing towards the city. So, which is why it went particularly to South Bombay. That's where the wind was blowing, and everybody woke up and realized that, oh my God, this is a big issue. But when we went down over there, we realized that these fires actually happen on a daily basis. It's just that we don't realize them. Either they are man-made fire, either they are fires just because of methane gas being trapped, or they are man-made to essentially reduce the amount of garbage that is there. So that was one surprising thing that came up. But the most surprising thing was that once we spoke to an NGO called Apnalay that has been working in the Shivaji Nagar slum area for almost a decade, and specifically in that neighborhood itself, we realized that the average life expectancy of people living in and around the dumping ground, these are not people that work inside the dumping ground, but just living in that neighborhood, was 37 years of age. And that just woke me up. I'm like, it's something that we have this secret life of trash that is happening where we essentially just keep it outside our house and it somehow disappears, and we never really know what happens with it. But it's actually affecting people in our own city, and it's happening in the center of Bombay. So how long is it going to take that is going to start affecting the entire city and entire country? And probably that incident was something that led on to us getting more deeper in this field and realizing that we need to make a bigger impact rather than just collecting scrap, and which is where our journey actually to evolve the business model also started.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting what you said about how it wasn't until the fact that wind was sort of blowing in a direction where it was directly affecting wealthy residents of South Mumbai that people even realized that this is a problem. Because if you drive around the city of Mumbai, you'll find lots of these various spots where rubbish is dumped and like it's piling high, and sometimes it's set on fire.
True, absolutely. I think we've been having this out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality, and it's the mindset of most people where they believe that it's just not my responsibility to do so, and there'll be somebody else that will just manage it for me. And for most people, like we did a survey to even find out if most people even know what happens with the trash. I mean, most people realize that as soon as I keep it outside the door of my house or down my building, the BMC picks it up and then essentially it disappears. And nobody really even knows what happens with it. So, I mean, that story for me was something that just really, made us, just woke me up in a way where it made us realize that it is going to affect us. And we see this happening not just in Bombay, but we see this like with the smog in Delhi, with the burning landfills of Kolkata and Hyderabad, as well as the ocean throwing up plastic. I think this is something that we've been reading about and seeing in the last few years all across our country as well as other parts of the world. So it is affecting us.
Yeah, and we've sort of been curiously desensitized to it, right? We know that this is happening and we are confronted by our waste, as Seher Mansoor of Bare Necessities put it, which is a very apt way of putting it. But we're sort of not yet taking the initiative to tackle it from an individual level. And I know that Raddi Connect does a lot of different things, and we can get into that. But can you talk a little bit about how the workshops that you guys do and sort of the public awareness initiatives that you have, what have your takeaways been from that? What are people's perceptions to waste? How do they think about it? What are they doing about it? Are they moved to do anything about it?
That's pretty interesting. So we've been a large focus of our work actually lies in creating behavior change. I think if you speak to anybody in the space of managing waste, I feel that's a challenge that everybody faces. I think people just creating that mindset change of people where people start taking responsibility of their own waste that they generate is a big task for us. And we've been working with schools, with corporate offices, with residential complexes. And the general feedback that we get is that most people think it is important. They think that yes, it is important for them to make sure that they're managing their waste and they should be doing their bit. But what most people do is that it's a very easy way to say that, guys, I am going to be doing my bit, but even though I am sorting my waste, but my sweeper doesn't collect it separately, or the municipality sends it in one vehicle, and all my work is essentially getting, is not going to the right place. It's an easy way of just shifting the blame either to the government or the organizations. So I think that's the mindset of most people, where they're like, okay, even though I'm going to do it, but the rest of the world is not doing it, or the rest of the stakeholders are not doing it, then why should I do it in the first place? And that's a problem I think that we need to fix. I think we need to not just start by managing or sorting our own waste, but also take up small steps where we initiate these changes that come up from either at a policy level from the government or even from the polluters themselves. So like, who are the people that are actually giving us these products? Do we not think it is a responsibility of the brands that are actually selling you these products for them to actually recover it as well? So I think it needs to take one step forward where we start by making sure, of course, do our own bit, and then even ask the right questions. Essentially, that's what it is, right? I think we need to ask the right questions to the right stakeholders.
Yeah, definitely. And to that end, can you talk about the verticals that Raddi Connect has and how it sort of comes into this issue of managing waste and then streamlining the informal sector for better waste management?
Yeah, sure. So over the past 5 years that we've been in this space, we've kept evolving or pivoting our business model on the basis of what the consumers have been asking for us, and also realizing where there is a space where we can actually add some value. So we're primarily working with 3 target audiences. One is individuals and corporate offices, where they whatever scrap that they generate, so the recyclable scrap, so in terms of paper, plastic, metal, glass, e-waste, they can use our service if they're in the city of Mumbai by simply coming onto our website, scheduling a pickup for your recyclables. How we do it is that we have an aggregated network of Raddiwalas that we have verified and standardized, who act as our last mile collection agents. And they essentially, so if you place a pickup, we will send the closest Raddiwala in your neighborhood. He is a verified guy with an electronic weighing scale, ID cards, standardized rate card as well. He comes to your place, collects your scrap and ensure that it gets recycled. So India and certain Southeast Asian countries have this concept of getting paid to recycle, which is quite odd. I mean, if you stayed in the US, you would realize that firstly, sorting your waste is mandatory by law, and if you don't do so, you actually fined over and above that. Whereas in India, you get somebody that comes to your house and gives you money for actually sorting your waste and recycling it. So we thought that we can actually, it's quite ironical, right? Like if you're getting paid to do so. The idea was that we start using this money for a good cause. We said that instead of this money being, so an average household generated about 100 or 150 rupees of recyclable scrap in a monthly basis. And in today's time, it's not that large an amount, right? It's not even a coffee at a coffee shop or even a movie ticket for that matter of fact. So we had this model called Recycle for Cause, where we essentially asked our consumers where not only they recycle their waste with us and empower the bottom of the pyramid while they're working, they also can support a cause of their choice by just recycling their waste. So we had this triple bottom line that you recycle your waste with us, you empower the Raddiwala networks, and support an organization of your choice. So we had 4 different NGOs that we are working with. So if you are an individual household or if you're a small corporate office, you can simply subscribe and get your recyclables collected. That's on one end where we are working with consumers. On the other end, we are working with municipalities to start setting up infrastructure. So the other issue that we realize is that even though people want to sort their waste, the sorted waste is not going to the right channel. So we are working with the Mumbai municipality, BMC, and we've set up our first material recovery facility, which is essentially a facility where once people start sorting their waste, we bring their dry waste component to our facility, where we have again given dignified jobs to waste pickers from our neighborhood who help us manage this waste. We bring it to our facility, sort this into about 30 plus categories, about 20 categories of plastic, 6 of paper, glass, metal, e-waste, and then channelize each one of them for recycling. So we have one such facility that's running in Mumbai. We actually had a contract with Hyderabad, which we were supposed to execute in March, but COVID has postponed that essentially. So we'll have that going as soon as things start to normalize. And we are expanding to more cities and talking to more municipalities to manage their waste. So that's the second vertical where we're working with municipalities. And then the third is where we are actually helping brands go plastic neutral. So with the new plastic waste management rules that have been amended, there's something called extended producer responsibility that's come up, which is a concept that Western countries, Europe and US already have, but it's something that has newly come up in India, and which is, I think, a good step that the government is taking, where they've made a responsibility of the producer of this waste, so essentially your large corporations and brands that produce this plastic, to recover as much plastic that they put out in the environment. So in simple language, if say brand X is selling 100 bottles of plastic or say 100 bottles of cold drink, they've got to recover this 100 bottles of cold drink and essentially make sure it's getting recycled. So we work with brands. We use the existing informal sector network that we have, our MRFs, our Raddiwalas, and also partner up with local organizations in other cities and recover this plastic on behalf of brands and ensure that it's getting recycled. So we're currently working in about 12 cities where with the help of our partners, we've recovered more than say 5,000 tons of plastic waste in the last 12 months. So I think that's the 3 verticals that we're in right now.
Yeah, and one thing I found quite interesting was that you talked a bit about how there is this sort of spending or there's this investment in how waste is sort of transported, right? But there isn't that much spending or investment, public spending, in the infrastructure that is needed to sort of move from this linear economy to a circular economy. And on top of that, we have, like you said, the problem where India is importing waste from other countries as well. So can you talk about why that's happening and where are we at with building this infrastructure and how are we going to go about it as a country?
Sure. So, I mean, like you rightly pointed out, I think if you just read the data, it says that we almost So our collection efficiency is good. I think India collects more than 90% of the waste that we generate. And we have spent a lot of money in just collection and transportation. And I guess that was the first, priority for the government, was that we don't have litter on our streets and streets are getting cleaner. And which is why they have taken that approach of, making sure at least whatever is getting generated gets collected. But I don't think we're far, far away from, the processing part of it. And I say it's not just an infrastructural issue, but it's also, again, coming back to it, a mindset issue. Even though we set up infrastructure, but people are not segregating their waste, I think the infrastructure is not going to be useful at all. It's like a chicken and egg situation where consumers are like, even if we do sort it, then there's no infrastructure to manage it. And if we set up infrastructure, there's no waste that comes to it. So I think, we need to go back to the drawing board and say that, okay, all stakeholders need to start doing their own bit. And there are multiple of them, it's not just the government and we as consumers, but there's also the recycling industry. There's also the brands that are putting in this plastic waste or other waste in the ecosystem. And they all need to start doing their bit. Infrastructure, yes, it's being built. So like with the Swachh Bharat mission that's come up, we're seeing that the government at least has the intention to, ramp up their infrastructure as well as build more capacities for the existing infrastructure that is there. But we're still far, far away. I mean, we can't expect to go zero waste. I don't think that's something that we can expect, but at least we need to start doing our bit. And yes, the government needs to start investing in more infrastructure as well to manage this waste.
Yeah, and quite a pressing issue in terms of the fact that cities are projected to house almost up to like 85 million people. This is going to have a huge influx with people looking for more opportunities, and managing that influx of people and the waste that they generate is definitely sort of a problem that we need to be on top of, or at least plan for ahead. And I think is also, we've got that issue on one hand, and on the other, we've also got COVID-19, which I'm sure is generating a lot of biomedical waste, right?
No, absolutely. I think you rightly pointed out. I think the amount of increase of waste that we're expecting in the coming few decades, we are essentially going to just run out of place to keep dumping our waste. I mean, that problem that we spoke about, not in our backyard, and we were just okay with it all during this while, but sooner or later it's going to be in our backyards because there's not going to be enough space to just keep dumping our waste. So like you rightly mentioned, we need to start looking at long-term solutions, and rather than just doing some quick fixes to fix the situation right now. And like you mentioned, yes, with the COVID-19 situation coming up, the composition of waste is certainly changing. We're seeing a lot of more gloves and masks and PPE gear that's coming into our waste. And I feel that it's become more important than before, honestly, where managing our waste has become more important, essentially because it has the risk of actually spreading the virus. If you are not managing your waste right now properly, you're essentially probably causing the spread of the virus. If you are infected, or even if you are not, if you are not putting in, and this has been happening for decades. What have we leave the masks and the gloves aside, but what have we been doing with our sanitary waste, our biohazard home waste that's coming out, injections and syringes that have been coming out? We haven't been managing that either, and 90% plus of the waste that is generated in the country is being managed by humans. It has a human touch to it. There's somebody that actually puts their hand into your waste, either to sort it or either to pick it up, or to just take out whatever's recyclable from it. And they have been facing these consequences with our other sanitary waste or other biohazard waste that is being generated for decades now. And I think it's high time we start realizing that these pandemics situations are time to change. I mean, we need to make that change happen sooner than later, or it's only just going to get worse.
Yeah, and like you said, that a lot of people who actually have to deal with our waste problem, if it's not us, it's another human being, so there's this huge opportunity cost attached to sort of not sifting out or not doing whatever bare minimum you can do before that waste goes and progresses through the waste management process. And there's a huge public health impact to that as well. Do you think I mean, the work that you're doing when you're setting up facilities like this, material recycling facilities, that's quite intensive. And what do you think scaling up looks like for you? I mean, what is the future of Raddi Connect? And are there any sort of supplementary initiatives that can help you and propel the work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so yes, I think we are a small piece of the puzzle in solving the waste issue in India, and of course, scale is something that we are certainly looking at. And but in terms of what is next, our idea is that we've been working on recovering this waste as a resource through the various channels and through the various stakeholders that we have. We will be expanding our presence in terms of setting up more facilities so that there is a more infrastructure to actually manage this waste at one end. And we will also be working largely with the informal sector because they actually manage more than 70 to 80% of our recyclable scrap in our country already. So, I mean, formalization and giving them the dignity that they have been, that they should have essentially for all the work that they're doing is something that we will be looking at. But our long-term idea is to close the loop. So, essentially, work with partners who can actually recycle this waste and ensure that we can actually make products out of it. So we're doing small scale pilots where we've made condensed boards out of these plastic waste. We've sent some material for plastics to road, plastic to oil, of course recycling paper and making new paper out of it, and then making pads and stationery out of it as well. So, I mean, that's the space that we are excited about, where we can actually recover this as a resource and convert that into products which we can probably give back to the consumer or even source it back to the brand. So, probably in terms of initiatives, I feel that if there are people that are working on newer technologies to actually create more value out of this waste, I think that would be really interesting for me to see. Because that's a space that has been growing a lot. We've seen that a lot of organizations and a lot of new startups and even just kids out of school have been trying to make something best out of waste in some way or the other. And which is what is exciting. I think there's so much that's happening in this space, and which is what keeps me going as well. I think there's more traction that has come up, or more people actually, at least, that have been speaking about new technologies or managing their waste in the last, say, 2 to 3 years as compared to the decade put together, So I'm pretty optimistic that even though it's not reached the place that we have, but there are a lot of people that are doing this.
And you've had quite an interesting journey, right? Because you passed your CFA and you decided to forego that very secure, that very lucrative career path to become this modern day Raddiwala. And it's very interesting. And I think it's also quite kind of unique. And if you could talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced and what was the sort of perception when you decided that you wanted to do this instead of whatever comes after a CFA.
So yeah, I mean, I think initially when I started, I was still pursuing my CFA when we did start Raddi Connect. I finished my level 2, and I was doing it as a side thing while we were working in the project. But the initial perception was, with my extended family, they came up to me and said that, "Bhai, you're studying finance and now you got into waste. What sense does that make?" Like it was I was quite aptly nicknamed the Raddiwala, the neighborhood, where everybody would call me that. So yeah, I mean, the cultural issue of people just, it's even our own extended family, which was like, why do you have to put your hands into waste? And that also brings us to the entire issue where, there's this one certain culture, certain sector of the society that has been told or has been essentially, they are the only people that actually manage our waste. And nobody else actually looks into it. So those were the initial things that we got from our extended family. But I think I'm fortunate enough that my immediate family was supportive in terms of what we were doing. And CFA, I feel, was something that just adds value to what I'm doing right now. I think that having the backing of numbers and just financial knowledge in terms of how things work, I think that adds a lot of value to what we do right now, because the economics of recycling is very hard to crack. I mean, how do you compete with the informal sector that pays no taxes, that has no minimum wage rate, that is probably downcycling this plastic that is being recycled, And you'll see people essentially with a small 100 or 150 square feet shop who have set up a recycling plant within that. I mean, there's a small extruder and shredder and they're just doing it. And how do you compete with that, So I think, yes, it would be exciting for me to it would be a secure job for me to go down the finance path and probably look at investment banking or, go into portfolio management, which would be a more secure job, but that probably wouldn't keep me excited enough. I think the challenge of just figuring this out, and also the more that we've got into this, the more that I've got motivated to work in this space, the more that I've been seeing in the last year. Honestly, I've traveled to multiple cities across the country, and the situation is just the same. I mean, it's not just the burning landfills of Mumbai. I went to Agra, it was the same. Hyderabad is also the same. We're working in Rajasthan, Jaipur, which is pretty much the same. So, I mean, it's something that somebody needs to take up, right? And I feel that the CFA just acts as a complementary skill for us to, be in this space, because most of the people, honestly, that have been in the space are not-for-profits that haven't been able to, honestly, they're doing some great work. It's nothing, no credit taken from them, because we work with a lot of them as well, and they're doing some awesome work in their own geographies, but they haven't been able to scale and make this large enough to become a business. And I think that's what excites me. And I think that's why I think CFA is complementary to what we're doing right now, even though it would have been a safe choice of career that I could have taken. But I think using that skill to actually figure out how the financials of the recycling market or just the entire ecosystem can work is more exciting than just probably trading in stocks or just being an investment banker on the backside.
Yeah, definitely. And who knows, maybe you could be a decade down the line, you could be like an investor a climate investor, or an impact investor, as they're called, who invests in other startups who are also trying to make a difference as a social enterprise, or as, sort of tackling the very pressing issues of climate crisis. And I think that there's definitely a lot of scope with that. So even if you've got this very sort of traditional by the book degree in finance or engineering or whatever else, there's definitely a lot of skills that you acquire that you can apply to whatever off the beaten track you want to go on.
No, absolutely. I agree. I think it just boils down to what just keeps you excited and keeps you going, at the end of it. And and it doesn't really matter what skill that you have or what degree that you have. Because I feel that my other option after doing my graduation was to probably go abroad and do my master's. And in hindsight, I feel that it is a great decision that I've taken to not do it, because having set up my own company, maybe in the social enterprise space, or even if you're doing anything else, having set up your own company from scratch, I think you're learning a lot more than, what a master's degree can teach you as compared to doing it yourself on the ground.
Yeah, and not to mention, I think having done that, so I have gone off and done a master's abroad, but I think you realize the value of doing something at a grassroots level only when you're sort of confronted by this very top-down view of policymaking or top-down view of any industry, essentially. I think when you are working with your own initiative, or whether you've decided to go into a startup, you learn so many skills and you actually understand the problem from a much more insightful and a much more meaningful space, I think.
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think, and probably another suggestion for people that are starting up is like, I think it's not about, like you rightly mentioned, the top-down view that we generally have. It's actually not just that, it's not simply if you want to start something, you sit in a room and make presentation, but it's actually going on ground. Like, even before we started Raddi Connect, we at least had about 10 months of research where we went and spoke to absolutely every person in the ecosystem, right? From, waste pickers. We surveyed about more than 100 Raddiwalas. We spoke to recyclers. We spoke to a few scrap mafias, if you can say so. And when you go down deep into that ecosystem is when you really realize, what's where the space is and what you need to get done. If you just look at it from the outside, it really is. You really don't know much, or you won't really find out much, or you won't find out what exactly is the space that you need to get into, or even if there is a problem that you can come up with a solution for.
That's quite interesting that you spoke to scrap mafias. What was that conversation like? I feel like that in itself should be something that a series like Sacred Games should have covered, where it's like, oh, look, there's this Rahul Nainani activist / aspiring social entrepreneur talking to some Kachra King in the bylanes of Mumbai.
No, I mean, the Gaitonde character which he played in Sacred Games was, it gives me quite a good glimpse about how it works. But for us, it was essentially when we were going down the neighborhood and we were talking to these people, we figured out why not go and see how these guys are working as well, because eventually we need to figure out a way to probably improve what they're doing, or, a way to that just make sure that like how they have been working doesn't happen in the future. But essentially they were not giving us much information. They said that, why are you even doing this? This is not going to happen. It's not worth your time. It's straight up discouragement that they put out. Fortunately, we haven't got any threats and stuff as yet. But I certainly know for sure some NGOs that have been working in this space for longer than us have got calls from these people. And it also boils down to the fire story at the Devna dumping ground. So some of them, like I mentioned, are man-made. It might be just a tiff between two people, those two Kachra kings essentially, and he's got angry and gone ahead and just burnt his space down. That stuff still does happen. I mean, we wouldn't expect it, but yes, it's still happening behind the scenes.
And I feel like I think we should contextualize this for listeners who are perhaps non-Indian or non-residential Indians. Can you just sort of briefly say who these scrap mafia / Kachra kings are and what is their business model?
Sure. So, if just to probably step back a little bit, the entire shadow recycling chain that works in our country has different levels of people that are there in it. So I think the level 1 aggregators are the people that are essentially picking from this. So these are waste pickers that are essentially either picking from the streets or from open dumps or open garbage bins or even from landfills. So at the landfill, once the mixed waste goes and gets dumped, there are people that actually go into these landfills and start scavenging for recyclables that they can take out. And then they go ahead and then give it to us level 2 aggregators. So if it is within the city, the Raddiwalas essentially become the level 2 aggregators who purchase this material from these level 1 aggregators who are essentially scavenging through this waste. And then the Raddiwala goes and gives it to a level 3 aggregator who's essentially who's probably at the outside of a city, and they have some kind of labor where they are sorting this or adding some value to this waste. So essentially they do the further sorting, and then there's a level 4 who does the pre-processing, so either compressing it into bales or shredding it. Now the scrap mafia comes into the picture at the dumping grounds. So the level 1 aggregators who are essentially scavenging from these dumping grounds have taken loans from these scrap mafias to start some kind of living within the city, and they treat them as bondage labor. Like it's a really, really messed up situation. They are not getting paid as much as they should. They are not being treated the right way, and because the mafia actually has a great hold over these people because they are essentially lenders for the level 1 aggregator, they have so much control over them that they just, there's no way of taking that out. So even though the waste that we produce just disappears, but there's so many people that that actually go into managing that, or even just get exploited into managing that itself. So yeah, the shadow supply chain, which leaving the scrap mafia aside, I like to call them as the invisible environmentalists. As without them, I don't think any of this recycling that we have been doing would happen at all. And what is the cost of it? It is that at the cost of us not managing our waste, that they are taking up the burden of getting themselves in a position where they are probably getting contaminated or getting infected by this waste to just clean up our mess. So which is why also is another reason where we have an internal motor for our company is to actually work with the informal sectors. These guys have been getting exploited for years and years, and have not been given the dignity for the work that they have been doing. And our idea is that instead of just displacing this ecosystem or keeping them in the existing ecosystem, why not formalize them? Like any other industry, they should have proper working conditions. They should have their basic amenities of healthcare and what government schemes that they're providing for. So we work quite heavily on that space where we actually start formalizing them, open up their zero balance bank accounts, so that they start becoming a part of the system. Where till they are not a part of the system, there's no way to just find them or just even do anything good for them. And the reason that they can be exploited is because they're not part of the system. If they were part of the system, they could actually get loans if they want to set up businesses, or there's a lot of schemes that are available for them. So yeah, I think the scrap mafias they have been there for decades and have been there at different parts of the ecosystem, but largely working at the dumping ground space and exploiting the scavengers or the waste pickers that are working at the bottom level, if that probably gives some context.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's sort of summarized the darker side of that supply chain. I know that you use the term shadow supply chain, but I think that the fact that there are entities that sort of profit off of this informal sector, I think it's important to sort of talk about that beyond the Bollywood lens of it,
No, absolutely. I think so. If you just look at this value chain, the level 1 and the level 2 aggregators that actually do the maximum work and the maximum hard work, they get paid the least in the entire system. And then there are recyclers who are sourcing this material at a lower cost directly from the mafia or from these larger wholesalers who've been exploiting them. So I think they are the people that are actually benefiting from them. But largely this happens because like in the West, what happens is that there is a cost to dispose waste. There's an economic cost to actually manage your waste, and which the government pays for. In India, there is no economic cost to dispose waste, right? Like, you essentially just keep it outside your house and it's done. There is no cost. You are not liable to make sure that it's going to the right place. So in some way or the other, we need to have that as a system where we start asking the right questions to not just the government, to also the brands who are producing all of this, right? At the end of it, who's putting this into the market? So in some way, I don't want to say that somebody's benefiting out of it, honestly. But you can see it yourself. You'll see who's producing it and how they have been benefiting it, or where is it going to finally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to sort of talk a little bit about the issue of dumping that you brought up earlier on, and the growing issue of e-waste, for instance. I know that up until 2017, China was accepting around 70% of the world's electronic waste. Vietnam and Thailand were also part of this. And in 2016 alone, the world's population discarded around 49 million tons of e-waste, which is, to give some context, around 4,500 Eiffel Towers. So can you just talk about what e-waste is and why have countries in Southeast Asia been these dumping grounds for e-waste?
Oh, sure. I think most of the e-waste that has been coming is coming from the West, even though now it is estimated that Asia is going to be the largest generator of e-waste. And it just boils down to this consumption habit, right? And this linear economy that we're in. We essentially, every time there's a new iPhone or there's a new laptop that comes up, we just keep buying and consuming without really figuring out what's happening next. And with this China situation where they've stopped the import of e-waste, they also did the same thing where they stopped the import of plastic scrap last year. And suddenly the entire world has woken up and realized that, okay guys, China is not going to be the dumping ground of the entire world and we need to start managing it. But what has happened is that it's now moving to Indonesia and like Southeast, other Vietnam and the other countries that we're talking about. And of course, we already understand the ill effects of e-waste being dumped and what is happening to the environment or the people that are managing it. But it all boils down to essentially circularity, right? Like I feel just the concept, if we need to start reducing our waste, the brands, and it has to start with the brands where they have to start thinking about what would happen at the end of life of their product while they're designing it. They are not thinking about it right now. If they thought that the battery could be reused or refurbished while they were designing it and they actually collected it back into the ecosystem, I feel that so much of the waste could be actually reused or maybe recycled, and the amount of dumping that would happen would reduce. So it's definitely small changes that you and me as individuals can make, But honestly, we are past that stage of small changes. We need big changes to happen in this ecosystem, and we need the brands to own up to what they have been doing. We need the governments to put the right policies and also to be able to implement them, because I feel policies are being created every day, but the implementation is something that we just don't see happening on ground. So yeah, I think the e-waste issue is something that we have been seeing for quite some time, and it has been there, and it's the same like the waste issue that we've been having, that's been there in our country or Southeast Asia for that matter of fact. And the answer boils down to, as consumers, to consume consciously, and for brands to figure out a way to manage their waste, or just think about what would happen at the end of life of their product.
And through your partnerships with these various brands, have you seen this sort of awareness emerge? Are they more proactive, perhaps, in sort of understanding the role that they play, which, like you said, is far bigger, right? Because as an individual, you can do composting, you can do sort of everything right at your end, and you will definitely have an impact. And we, everybody listening, both of us, I think, can speak for you here as well, Rahul. We will definitely encourage that. But you're right in saying that there needs to be like a systemic shift as well. There needs to be responsibility taken by huge organizations, the Unilevers of the world, for instance. And so have you noticed that there has been this shift in their understanding of what their responsibility is?
As compared to, say, 5 years ago, in the last year or 2 years, there has been a lot of shift and at least a talk towards moving towards a more sustainable or closed loop kind of an environment. Honestly, it's the public pressure that has spoiled these companies to actually take this decision, with so much bad press that's happening with the plastic pollution, the oceans filling up with plastic. The brands sooner than later had to take that call. And with extended producer responsibility become mandatory in a lot of countries, like ours in India as well, we are at least seeing the brands to take the first step, which is at least making sure that they are being responsible and paying for the collection and disposal of the plastic that they produce. So, like you mentioned, Hindustan Unilever is one of our clients, and also along with that, a lot of other FMCG brands have taken up the initiative to at least collect the plastic from the different cities or different states that they have been putting out, which I think is just a small step in the puzzle. I think we need to start at the beginning. We need to start at the time when they're designing the product. I mean, right now, in most cases, what brands are doing is that they design a product in terms of just delivering the product from their warehouse to you, and then that's where it ends. Once you open that packet and finish the chips out, that's where their work ends. But that's where it actually needs to start, and they need to start right at the designing phase, where brands need to start design for recycling and recoverability. How do they make sure that their products, once collected, can be recycled into higher grade products or higher grade plastics, higher grade recycled plastics, which is a very small step that very few brands have taken up. I don't think that has been taken up at a larger level. I think there are few companies that are doing pilots in business model innovation where they're trying to reuse the packaging or give it in reusable containers. There are certain brands that have actually recovered some plastic waste and made products out of it. But we need it to be a large industry shift, and it can't be just one company. It has to be an industry coming together and making that change. Where they first, to start off with, they start using recycled plastic in their value chain. If there is no demand for recycled plastic to start off with, there's no recycling that's going to happen. Today in India, you see that recycled plastic is actually a lower quality and an inferior product as compared to virgin plastic, and is being downcycled more than being upcycled. So when I say downcycled, I think recycle of HDPE bottles or HDPE containers, it's being recycled back into low grade products, which are being made into either buckets or pipes and things like that. It is not being recycled back into the same quality of product again. So where they need to start is by starting to make sure that they have a demand for recycled plastic, and at the same time redesign their products to ensure that it can be easily recovered and easily recycled. And for that, like I mentioned, it does not have to be one company, but it has to be an industry that comes together. Because so just to give you an example in terms of how this works, if you have been in India and if you purchase any beverage bottle which is made out of PET, they essentially all look the same, right? Even if it might be a little bit thin or thick, but they look all the same. Maybe a Pepsi, a Coke, or Bisleri, or maybe any other product. Isn't that true? Bottle looks the same, right? But the challenge that happens is that the bottle is made out of PET, the cap is made out of PP. The label is either made out of PP or PVC. With no standardization happening over there, it creates a lot of challenge to just recover this plastic waste. Now, we can't have one brand to do it. If it is all made out of PP, it becomes easy for us to sort it and segregate it. It goes into a separation tank. It becomes much, much easier that way. But because brands they choose to decide whatever they want to, it makes a big challenge to recover this plastic waste. So yes, I think we as individuals have a very important role to play as well, to start by doing our bit, and also by starting to push the brands in the right direction, or just start by asking the right questions, or start by even using the brands that are actually doing their bit, so that they are incentivized to actually make sure that they are spending money into infrastructure and recovering this plastic waste and moving towards a more closed loop solution.
Yeah, and to that end, can you talk a bit about some of the practices that you perhaps follow at home or you subscribe to as an individual, whether it's purchasing from a certain brand or whether it is, just practices like composting or segregating your waste? If you could just talk a bit about what it is that you do as a person and you would encourage people listening in to sort of get in on as well.
Sure. I mean, so living in India and Bombay, I think we all have very hectic lives. And sustainability or managing your waste essentially is always on the back foot. It's not something that comes in the forefront while we're doing it. So, I mean, for me, I think it's just simple things. It's very, very simple things that I would say. Consume consciously is one part. So, essentially, if I don't need something, don't get it. If I definitely need it, make sure that I'm at least reading from where it is coming and where it is coming. Who's the brand behind it? What are they doing? Because we understand that not everybody can afford to live can't go to a zero waste lifestyle and have that extra expense to live that way. But at least you can make sure that you're picking the right products. Go local. I mean, that's the easiest thing. Our Indian tradition has been instilled where we have been going to local markets to right from getting spices to vegetables, or even reusing, going back in the day and reusing our bottles for milk, for that matter of fact. So just start consuming more consciously. So if you have to buy something, make sure that you're at least reading from where it is coming. And then the other side is just to dispose it off responsibly as well. That's one part which we often forget. So yes, if you can substitute your existing stuff with more sustainable alternatives, so like if you can get rid of your plastic cups and containers and use reusable, that's great. But if in case you do really have to use it, then make sure at least it is going to the right channel. And when I say the right channel, it is there are a lot of organizations across the country that are doing some great work, and it's a matter of you to just Google them up or find them and just make sure that it's being channelized to the right place. So as a principle, what I do is ensure that at least my recyclables are going to the right place. Also, composting is something that is a little bit of a task. We've just moved houses. I was doing home composting earlier, which is not happening honestly as of now. But yes, it's the easiest way to at least take your first step towards going zero waste. I think composting at home is no rocket science. You can literally do it in a bucket at your house. You need some culture to do so. So that's one step that people can take. Also, just the simple swaps, get rid of everything but use a cloth bag. I mean, I make sure that I have 4 to 5 cloth bags in my car at any given point of time. So if I'm anywhere and I need to get something, I don't need to get any of their plastic bags or even paper bags for that matter of fact. Those are small steps that probably you can take,
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think we should end it over there. I'm so glad that you came on board to talk about Raddi Connect, to talk about your journey, to talk about the waste management cycle. And I think it's been absolutely incredible learning so much as well, because God knows I can't travel and speak to all of these waste pickers at this moment. But yeah, it's been great speaking with you, Rahul. Thank you so much. And is there anything else that you'd like to add? Perhaps how people can sort of start using Raddi Connect for themselves?
Yeah, sure. I mean, thank you firstly for Sanchi for having me. And I think if you want to use our service, you can simply go onto our website. It's raddiconnect.com, RADDI connect.com. We are on also on all social media with the same name. You can find us there with regards to what are the new stuff that we are doing. And yeah, and as a closing note, I would like to just say that just be conscious in terms of what you're consuming. I think that's something that I need to reiterate over and over again. And we do this. The working on behavior change is something that is it's a big task for us that we've been constantly doing. Ask the right questions. Even if you can't switch something, just ask the brands the right questions. Is that packaging really needed? Can it be changed into something? Because we as consumers have a very big role to play, because if we stop buying a certain product, I think the brand is going to more or less has to change to what we want. So the way that I see it is that the same way that we're moving towards organic foods and sustainable living, I think we need to start picking more sustainable products as well. So yeah, I think that's my small bit.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here, Rahul. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Sanchi, for having me.
Of this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find all the relevant links and handles to know more about our guest this week in the episode description. If you have any feedback, suggestions, requests, or simply just want to get in touch with us, then please do head over to our podcast website. We are available to flag and say hi to via Facebook, Instagram, or email. Thank you and see you next week.